the way you trust Putin is to defang him, which is to take away their hard currency earnings in the oil market. And that's really what matters.
Well, let's talk to Thomas Del Beccaro, who is former chair of the California Republican Party. Thomas, welcome to the program. Welcome to Times
Great
Radio.
to be on.
Great stuff. Okay, so how do you think the sight of the British Prime Minister and the American President glad-handing, bonhomie, showering praise on each other will go down with A, traditional Republicans, and B, the Maga army? That's once America first, and that is deeply hostile to much that goes on outside the country.
Well, I think the last part is a bit overstated. I'll tell you, to someone who's studied foreign policy for 4 decades and writes history books, I thought your prime minister did a virtuoso job. And he, I read a lot about what might happen if he came over and whether he was ready for this prime time. And I thought he did brilliantly, if I can use that word, on this side of the ocean.
What was it about his performance versus what was written in advance that made you think, yeah, this was a virtuoso performance? He pressed all the buttons. What was it about him?
Well, when you're on the international stage, it's always very important to remember you have to speak with clarity, because whatever you say gets translated into hundreds of languages. And so if you speak with clarity, you're less misunderstood around the globe. And I thought he didn't act in any particular way like he didn't belong on a stage. And we have seen other leaders in the past who don't look like they are ready for what we would say here is prime time. There was none of that. He was poised. He had a message. He came here with a purpose. And I think he left, as your prior guest just said, very successful. There's something very important here to go past what viewing this from one side or the other. The UK has 2 really important things for Donald Trump and his agenda. Number one, if a good trade deal is struck between the two with a lowering of tariffs versus the system that exists today, then that can serve as a model for Donald Trump for all other countries on the globe. He can say, look, England, the UK and us have been able to set aside past differences on trade, and we have a good trade deal here with a lowering of tariffs. That is immeasurably important to Donald Trump's presidency and, frankly, to the economies on both sides of the Atlantic. That's incredibly important. Also, and I think very bravely, we know what happened to Tony Blair and the Labour Party with the outcome of Iraq, right? So bravely he has said, this is what we're going to do with respect to Ukraine, and he said boots on the ground, and additional spending related to defense, moving it up, I think, from 2.5 to 2.7. Correctly, if I'm wrong.
No. It's from 2.3 to 2.5 by 2027. Yep.
Yes, there's the 7. Sorry.
Yes.
So those things are all exactly what Trump wants as a model for everyone else. So you may discuss within England whether that was good policy by him as a vis-a-vis local politics, meaning within England.
Yeah.
But very much important that there's so much in common between these particular leaders at the present moment.
Well, of course, because for lots of reasons, including the burden of history, the UK and the US have to be seen to be in lockstep on most issues, which is why what J.D. Vance and, of course, the president himself, what they've said in the last few weeks has really upended things on this side of the Atlantic. Now, when it comes to the president's obvious warmth towards the UK in general and Keir Starmer in particular, how far is that reflected among politicians on Capitol Hill, and not just on Capitol Hill, but beyond? How well versed are they in what's going on in the UK, and how connected do they still feel to matters Britannia, if I can put it that way?
Well, the U.S. has benefited from two large oceans and been able to pay attention to itself for, I don't know, ever since the War of 1812, if I could bring that up.
Yes.
By and large, of course, they went to World War I, World War II, League of Nations, and the United States. But it remains a fact of history that the vast majority of American politicians are domestic, meaning they have very little truck, if you will, with foreign policy. And so what's actually going on within the UK, really, they're not prepared to talk in any great length of that. I doubt any of them could talk about comparing him with Tony Blair in Iraq and the risks that he took. But what is important every 2 years here is the state of the economy, and a good trade deal between our two countries. They can understand that, and they're afraid of the talk of tariffs. And if England and the United States can show the way for the world, they'll appreciate it.
And how do you think the president's performance, maybe he was riffing off script as usual, teasing the prime minister about his accent and his negotiating skills, how will that have gone down among mainstream Republicans and, of course, among the Maga faithful?
Well, the MAGA faithful believes in the mission of this president, and they give him a wide berth on a lot of issues. And we must mention that all the talk over here is that Donald Trump is a dictator among the left, is a dictator who doesn't work with people, and yet we have all these foreign leaders. And so today was a demonstration of charm by both leaders. And so the fact that they're moving towards peace, and look, ultimately, the United States is going to have personnel on the ground, and they're going to have a lot of economic and personnel there, civilian. Maybe the UK and France have boots on the ground in Ukraine, and that'll be the way it'll be until Putin dies. And then we can go from there. But Trump doesn't want us having another major base someday in Ukraine. So the MAGA movement will see this as a victory for the president if he, in fact, brings peace and there is a good path forward. And frankly, if there's British troops on the ground, UK and American personnel, France and American personnel, then Russia isn't going to be invading Ukraine again in the near future, and I think during Putin's lifetime. So I think they'll be quite happy.
The president has said that he feels he knows Putin and he thinks he can trust him, he can trust his word. The prime minister demurred on that. Of course he would. And most Europeans would not trust Putin as far as they could throw him. What about most Republicans, particularly on Capitol Hill? Would they be alarmed that the president says, I think we can trust Putin?
Look, I've always said that conducting foreign policy in the press is bad for foreign policy. So what I think Trump is doing currently is sort of keeping Putin quiet instead of throwing spurs at him that could move him in a bad direction. And so he said trust but verify, but let's keep this very clear. The U.S. sanctions, which, by the way, started with Biden, on Russian oil exports is having a huge effect. And so the way you trust Putin is to defang him, which is to take away their hard currency earnings in the oil market. And that's really what matters. And I think he doesn't want to create a big row with him at this time. But and then you can go forward from there. I wouldn't put too much in that he can trust him. All right,
Thomas Del Beccaro, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And Thomas is the former chair of the California Republican Party. It's Henry Bonsu on Times Radio.